are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Ryan Coleman here at iForm Builder. We're going to give just another 15-20 seconds for more people to enter the room, and we'll begin here shortly. Okay, great. So welcome to the iForm Builder 102 Building Smart Forms. My name is Ryan Coleman, Director of Customer Success here at iForm Builder. And joining me today is our trainer and solutions engineer, Barrett Johannesson. Barrett's going to be jumping into the nuts and bolts and into the weeds of building, more complex, robust forms within the platform. Before we do that, though, I like to just cover some high-level details here. So we have a couple events coming up, and on October 28th, we have the Power User Summit. The Power User Summit is open to all customers. However, it's really focused on really making your data dance and having different types of or being able to take the iForm Builder platform to the next level. So we have a lot of customers that are leveraging the API. They're doing some really neat automated workflows, and it's a matter of us showcasing what they're doing, also letting you under the sheets, under the hood a little bit, showing what's happening inside of iForm Builder, what's possible, as well as what's happening, in the development cycle along the way. So last fall, we had an NGO summit. It was wildly successful. We're kind of piggybacking off of that, and now it's being opened up to a broader audience, but also allowing those of you that are power users or aspire to be power users to understand what it takes, as well as, really see what's happening out in the marketplace. On that, the day before the Power User Summit, we actually will be having live in-house training. So there's two training sessions going to be running concurrently. One is integrating with third-party tools. So it's a beginner integration series, as well as a form building 101 series as well. So our intention there is for you to, build capacity. If there's others on your team that you're looking to, hand this off to, it's a full day of training, pretty much a crawl, walk, run, fly approach towards really learning the system. So definitely take a look at that. I'll be sending out a link here shortly, and you'll be able to follow up on it. If you have any questions, reach out to Barrett or myself. Be more than happy to help you there. And before we start off any training whatsoever, we really want to ground everything in a solid foundation. And we discovered this model called SAMR. And what SAMR allows you to do is, first, it stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. And what we really see here is that at substitution, we have users that are simply taking, their paper forms and translated it into iForm Builder. It's a low value, low reward, but at the same time, it is creating additional value and it's making your life easier. What we find, though, is as soon as users are able to switch the mindset in terms of augmenting that workflow, they're now standardizing certain selections within their forms. They're performing calculations directly on their device. They're taking photos and leveraging, the one-to-many or multi-linking subforms on their forms. It's really augmenting the way that they used to collect data. They're expediting that process. They're making it go a lot faster. So we're seeing a greater return in productivity and ROI and a higher value to the organization. Now, as soon as you cross that dotted line, the data has already been collected. It's now a matter of eliminating any manual work. It's a matter of rethinking how automation enters your business and or your organization. So from the device, record gets submitted to the server. It's now a matter of, do I have a different type of dashboard that gets populated? Do I have a PDF report get populated automatically by leveraging either a third-party tool or building my own integration into that? That's just modifying your current workflow so that it's eliminating the human process. Once we go to the redefinition side, that's really where the power users are living, and they're seeing exponential growth. They're seeing amazing ROI in terms of the money that they're paying for iForm Builder versus what they're actually seeing in return. I have some customers that are eliminating thousands of hours of labor on an annualized basis because they're able to fully implement iForm Builder. So yes, there's time being saved in the field capturing it, but then also what they're able to do in terms of creating reports, populating dashboards, populating backend systems. All of that is happening with these web services. And once you're able to redefine that workflow, the sky is really the limit. So today, the training for building smart forms is definitely a foundation. It's going to allow you to add that skip logic, add calculations, create smarter, intuitive forms with those conditional values and those dynamic values built in. So with that said, I want to turn this over to Barrett. And like I said, Barrett Johannesson is a solutions engineer and in-house trainer with iForm Builder. Barrett, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ryan, and welcome everyone to the Building Smart Forms training webinar. And to start, these are just some of the topics that we're going to cover today. Just to give you a little bit more information as well, my goal and my hope today is to show you really that the possibilities that you can achieve with using the smart controls within iForm Builder, as well as making you more aware of some of the capabilities. One thing to keep in mind is everything that we cover today, all the documentation is available to you through our Customer Success Center. And again, if you have questions, I'm here for you. I'm happy to answer any questions, and Ryan will field those questions throughout the training. The other thing is, after this training, if you start fiddling around and putting in some of these smart controls, and you do have questions immediately, you can use our iForm Builder chat where we have an agent on the site. Hopefully they're there, but if they're not, you can submit a ticket and they'll get back to you soon. But you'll be able to get your questions answered right away. The first thing we're going to do today is go over just a high-level overview of what smart controls are and what kind of define each different smart control that you have available to you within iForm Builder. The next thing is how to add simple functions to a form. The third topic for today is to display a user's input or their selection on the device, adding functionality to option lists, and then the iForm Builder built-in functions. So those are the 5 training topics for today. To start, let's go through some of these best practices for form building. If you participated or listened to the last recording of the training session that we had, then these may sound familiar to you. The first thing here is to use a naming convention for all forms. So if you're using a parent form or a main form and then a subform, we usually use like a naming convention like _parent at the end of each parent form name and _child for the subform. Another best practice is to have a device handy while you're building the forms. This is for testing and to make sure that it's looking the way that you want it to. The third best practice here is to clean the local database in the iForm app if something doesn't look right on the form. Very simply, that's in the settings of your iForm app, and it's just the option to clean local database or to empty local database, depending on if you're using an Android or an iOS device. One thing to keep in mind with the Clean Local Database button is this clears out every piece of iForm data that you have on your device. So make sure that you've already submitted all your records before you clean the local database. My next tip here for the best practices is to test on all device types before going live. The reason for this is if you're using an iOS or if you're using Android, it may look a little different, as well as if you're using maybe an iPod Touch versus using an iPad. The next best practice is to open multiple browser windows for convenience. This is something that I always do, especially when I'm adding smart controls to my form. There are times where you'll need to get a table name of the parent form and use that table name with the subform aggregation in the subform. So instead of going back and forth, I have more than one window open. I'm able to go and copy that first parent table name and bring that over to my subform without having to close a window. The next step, best practice, is to add the required fields once the form is complete. This is just a preference on my part, and the reason for it is just because while I'm testing the form on my device, I want to make sure that that I can see if it's submitting correctly and what the record will look like. So if I have that required field, then that's going to make, as you can imagine, it'll make me input data for every single field before I can submit the form. The next best practice is just basically a reminder that only the parent form needs to be assigned to a user. Every time you build a form, that's automatically going to be assigned to your username, but you can easily unassign it through the form assignment in the form builder. And that last best practice is to always follow the iForm Builder golden rules. And I'm going to touch upon those in just one moment. Going along with the best practices, I mentioned earlier to build for the device type and also build for the smallest device. We've already spoken about why you build for a device type, but the reason for building for the smallest device is sometimes when you're using a select option list, it'll look different on both if you're using the tablet or the iPad versus if you're using a smaller handheld device. So make sure you look at it in the smallest device to see that all your text is filling up the area correctly. This webinar recording and these screens are going to be shared with you after. So as you can see this down here, I have a little link that will be shared with you, and feel free to click on that when you go through the slide deck if you so choose. I mentioned earlier about the form building golden rules. So here are the 4 golden rules that we have. That first one is test before going live. The reason for that is you don't want to get out in the field and have your users ready to collect data and to find out that the form doesn't work correctly. Maybe there's a misstep in the JavaScript that you wrote for the smart controls, or they're able to view a field that you thought was hidden, or vice versa. So just make sure you test before you go live. The second form builder golden rules is to have unique data column names that are database friendly. The data column name needs to be database friendly, or as you're building it, it will not save. So if you get a little error message saying that your database or your data column name is not database friendly, you'll have to refresh your browser window to then be able to save. It's very easy to fix, and we do have a list of terms that are not database friendly within our Customer Success Center. So if you have questions or if you'd like to see that list, we do have that article available to you. The third golden rule here is to not change an input type, the data size, or the encryption of an element on a live form, because it will delete the data. That's very, very important for you to understand, especially if you are the form builder and you're going through and making some of these changes on your form. If there is the time where you need to make a change to an element or input type on a live form, I strongly suggest you just disable it, like you see in this little screenshot below, and then copy that input type, or copy the element that was previously there, copy that, and then change the input type so you don't lose any of that data. All right, so up next is our overview of smart controls. So we're going to talk about what are smart controls, why you would use them, and what they can be used for, and what are some tips. So the first question here is, what are smart controls? Smart controls add functionality to a form, and they use basic JavaScript to add the actions to the different elements. Why you'd want to use them? The first reason is to cut down on human interaction with a form. What I mean by that is if you would like to have an option list, maybe you have the user select a specific state and then have an option list underneath that would only display maybe stores in that state. So you're cutting down on that human interaction with the form. The next is to define what a user sees based off of their selections going off of that option list, so they're only going to see stores for a specific state. And that third is to cut down on human error. This is so important for your data, and we want to make sure that we supply you with good data. So using the smart controls will help you cut down on that human error and make you more successful, which is our main goal. Underneath here, I have two links that you can use to become more fluent with JavaScript if you're not very fluent with it. You don't need to use the smart controls because we do have the Customer Success Center help desk articles, but these are two very helpful tools. So here's our overview of smart controls. Within the iForm Builder smart controls, you have these 5 different fields. The first one is the dynamic value. The definition of that, you'll use the JavaScript statement, strict or conditional, to set the value of an element. The second here is the condition value. When the statement evaluates as true, the element will display on the device, otherwise it will remain hidden. So with the conditional value, you are still collecting data, and that element can still be put into play, but it may not be viewable to the user at all, or it may only be viewable based off of a specific selection or specific input. The third smart control type is a dynamic label. This uses JavaScript statements to specify the label of an element. And then the final two go together. It's a client validation and validation message. Client validation, you're going to use the JavaScript and custom validation logic to restrict a record from uploading unless certain values are entered. And that validation message is what will show up if they do not follow that logic that you put in place for that client validation. So next up, we have the overview of the smart controls. So what can they actually do? Now, the first one is you can show or hide elements based off of a user's input. You can default elements, maybe default an email element to a specific email address. You can add mathematical calculations. You can add hard returns to text areas to create a list based off of the user's input. You can validate the user input, concatenate multiple elements into one element, and finally, subform aggregation. Here are some tips. That first one is that you must use the data column name in the smart controls. You see here I have the reference to just the DCN. So throughout, I may reference it again as DCN as a data column name just because that is a little long. So I just want to make sure I pointed that out to you. The second tip here is that the table name and page level JavaScript is located in the Edit Form Properties page. So when you see, maybe you're looking at some of our documentation and it tells you to get the table name of the parent form. You can find that through the Edit Form Properties page. Our third tip here is to use page-level JavaScript for more in-depth JavaScript functions. So maybe you're very fluent in writing JavaScript code and JavaScript code, and you want to make sure that you have this really complex workflow that you want to be able to achieve. Maybe using that page-level JavaScript is better than using the dynamic value section of the smart controls for this functionality. And then the last tip that we have here is to use the following to add multiple conditionals to an element. So as you can see, I'm not really going to go through each one of those, but you do have the and, the or, to see if something's equal to something else, as well as the false and the conditional value hides the element from the view on the device. All right, before I go any further, Ryan, we doing good over there?
Yes, we're doing great, Barrett. No questions, but at the same time, if those of you who are on the call, for whatever reason, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you use the GoToWebinar link on the right, you can click on questions or the chat, and I'll be more than happy to send you links or follow up offline.
All right, thank you, Ryan. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't over talking. The next thing I wanted to show you is actually, I want to show you what these smart controls will look like on the device. So here, hopefully you can see my iPad, I'm sorry about that. And I'm going to go ahead and open up my iForm app. And I built this form earlier today, so you can see that it doesn't take too much time to get the ball rolling with the smart controls. All right, so the first aspect that I want to show you within these smart controls is the concatenation of elements. So as you can see, I have a normal text element here, and if I just place in my first name, and my last name, and then the date of birth, you can see now that bottom field, which is a read-only field, has my first and last name as well as my birth date. So it's concatenated those three fields into one in a read-only element underneath. The next form field that I have here is using the client validation for the user to select a future date. So here, if I select on the next scheduled visit, I'm brought to a date field, and this is defaulting to today's date. So potentially, if I save this and I select August 27th, I get an error message that says, please enter a future date. So the validation code that I wrote forced the user to place in a future date rather than today's date. Once I select maybe September 27th and I select, that error message goes away. If you're using an Android device, you may not receive that error message right away, but when they go to submit the form, then that error message will pop up. If that's the case for you, and maybe you have multiple fields in your form that are using client validation, or maybe they're questions, or I guess maybe if they are questions, there's a way that the user can identify which of those fields are the client validation fields that they have to revisit and input a different answer. Under the client validation, we had the show element based off of the user's input. So my question here, was there any broken equipment in the lab? If I select yes, then those other three fields show up. It says what was broken, and this is just a regular text area with no smart controls. I place in the lamp, and then underneath it, I've used the dynamic label, and it says, does the lamp need to be replaced or repaired? So if I select replace, or I can select repair. I'll just select replace here. Underneath, I had the send email to. So I have defaulted the email widget with using the dynamic value. I've defaulted it to a specific email address so that it'll always be sent there unless the user opens the element and places in a different email address. Underneath that, I have the smart option list and ZZ display value. So this first aspect will be the smart option list. So based off of if I select lift or if I select speed agility, will change what's shown in the pick list underneath. So if I select lift, then I see arms, legs, and other. If I select speed and agility, then in that following pick list, I see jump, skip, hand-eye coordination, or other. So I'm going to go back to lift, and from there, I'm going to select other. And now I have an other exercise field that now shows up on my form so that I can place in that content. If I go back to that lift and in that pick list I select arms, then at the bottom it says today's focus, and using the ZC display value, it shows the arms are the text that was selected for that option list. Now, the reason you'd use ZZ display value versus just have it referencing the option from the option list is because naturally it'll use the metadata or use the data in the background, which is the key value. So naturally, if I didn't use ZZ display value, it wouldn't display arms. It would display whatever number it was used for that specific option. And I'll be showing you all of this and showing you what the smart controls look like within the form builder in just a moment. Underneath that section, I have the iForm Builder built-in function. So as you can see, it immediately displays my username. So the username that I'm logged into on the device is Train Barrett. And the other two fields are using the subform aggregation, so the built-in functions for subform aggregation. So I'm going to open up my subform, which is the mathematical functions, and I'm going to place in some information. Within this form, I've already put in dynamic values to get a sum, as well as to do some addition, subtraction, and multiplication for these three fields. Now that I've submitted that record, to have my subform aggregation aggregate the totals, I need to create another record. Okay, I've created these two records. Most likely I have more than this, but for this example I have those two records, and my subform aggregation should be showing up right now, but I'm guessing I missed. Actually, I know what I did. I didn't call to the correct subform, so I'll show you how that is. And underneath that, you'll see my label that says, "Thanks for taking the time to fill out this form today, Barrett." So I use my dynamic label again. All right, I know I just threw a lot at you, and so are there any questions before I go into really how to achieve some of this functionality? Ryan, we're good?
Yes, Barrett, we are good. I did have a couple questions about people asking if they could view this form later. And basically, if you email, or send me your email address or drop me an email, I'll be more than happy to figure a way out for you to be able to view the data or view the form on your device. But yes, that's the only question that came up so far. So please continue.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Based off of the form that we just did, or I just showed you, I want to show you kind of what it looks like on the back end within the form builder. So the first step we had was the concatenation of the elements for each of these fields, for the first name and last name and the date of birth. You can see that I have this in my dynamic value. And I'm referring to the data column name of each of those elements. The reason I have that is just a way for this element to identify its name, essentially. So just saying, hey, pay attention, this is your name, so that when I have my underneath, when I have my read-only smart controls of concatenation, it's able to identify what its name is for each one. So here's the first name, last name, and date of birth. So the data column names of these three elements, and I've added them together. I've also added spaces here as well as a comma. All right, so that I just want to show you that first field, and I'm going to show you that on this side of things in just a moment too. The first thing here, before I even go to that, I jumped ahead myself. Sorry about that, but I want to discuss how to default the elements. So earlier in that form, we defaulted the email to a specific email address, and that's done by just using what I refer to in this very technologically savvy term as the squiggly brackets. So in the dynamic value, you would place in the squiggly brackets and then one of these different types of defaulting methods. If you're using some kind of text or email address, within the squiggly brackets, you do use quotes. The next part that we did within that form was we used calculations and then the concatenation, which I showed you before within Form Builder. And essentially what you have to do is within the dynamic value, you need to call to the previous data column names. So the same way that we did that with the data column names for the concatenation with the first name, last name, and then we went to the birth date, you do the same thing with the math functions, and except, of course, you use your symbols. After that, you have using the dynamic label. Now, the dynamic label is, again, how you reference a previous input by the user in the label. So where I did that was I had the user place in what was broken, and maybe they typed in, that the bulb was broken. So after they identified what it was that was broken, in the label underneath it for the repair or replace, it says, does blank, whatever the data column name is for that previous element, need to be replaced or repaired. So in that example I showed you, it said, does the bulb need to be replaced? Again, the reason you'd want to use the dynamic label for an instance like this is to remind the user what they had input for a previous selection, as well as in your data, you're able to see those as a label, you're able to identify it again. Another way to display the user's input is to display what the selection that they chose from an option list. The way that you do that is by placing in the dynamic value of a text or read-only element after the option list is the ZZ display value underscore and then the option list element name. So here an example would be to allow users to edit the options that they've selected, to view text selection of an option list instead of the key value, or to add a string of text to an option list selection. So here I had the ZZ display value and then the data column name, and this is what I want to show you. So blank was today's muscles focus. In the form that we just went through, I've used the ZZ display value in two different areas. The first area was the ZZ display value for, this is a hidden field, as you can see for my conditional value I have as false, but I have it referring to that previous selection and having it place in the text versus placing in the number. The reason that I have that is because later on in the following element, I'm referencing that specific, that ZZ display value, that this was the data column name. I'm using that in my label saying if they selected whether it was arms or legs, then display that within the other exercise title. So blank other exercise. The other example I had here was today's focused, and that just showed in the dynamic value I just have ZZ display value underscore and then the data column name, and it's referencing what they selected from that pick list. And then the next part was that client validation. So where we had the future date, where they had to select a date in the future, this is where you'd want to place in that validation and say, okay, you cannot submit this form until this specific field has been validated for you to continue. This was done by two different elements in my form. The first one is actually a hidden element, and it's defaulting to today's date. The reason for that is I need to have that occur before I can add that validation message, because I need to reference it in my validation code in that following element, in that logic. So in the client validation, I have, this is the code that I've placed in there, and it's basically saying, that today's date, what they've selected, needs to be greater than today's date. And then this is the error message that popped up. When I tried to select today's date, it says, please enter a future date. Please note that when you're placing in this validation message, it does need to be in quotes. All right, moving forward, we're adding smart controls to option lists. So I had this in my form, and it's very easy to do. The first one is to display an element based off of the user selection. So you were able to see that today with my other option list showing up when the user selected other. The way that this is done is very simply by the element underneath my form, which was the other text. Oops. It's referencing the previous pick list. So here, the data column name was called what type, and in the conditional value underneath that element in my text, it says what type equals 2. So if I go to my option list and open up my option list manager, you'll see that the other is the second option here. Now the other option with option list is to make a segmented option list, and this is what I also have here. So where it says type of exercise equals 1 and type of exercise equals 0, that's placed in the advanced functions, and that's referencing the select option list that I had even before that, which was the data column name was type of exercise, and that first option that they had in that smart control, the first option that they had in that select will show these options, and then the second option in that select option will show the following. So going back, my select was lift and speed and agility. And then open this. So if they selected lift, then they would get arms, legs, and others. If they selected speed and agility, then they would get the jump, skip, hand-eye coordination, or other. As you can see, I have other listed twice here. Now, one thing you'll have to keep in mind is these key values in the advanced section always need to be unique. So the same way that you need to have a data column name that is unique and database friendly, these do as well. So here I can easily change that, and I've changed my second one, the key value, to other1_button, and the other_button is that first key value. So to make sure that those are both unique. So this is what I just showed you again, referencing that a previous option list for segmented option list to change what's being viewed by the user. Next up, we have the iForm Builder built-in functions. We have 4 of these that we're going to talk about. That first one is the iFormBuilder.username. By placing that in the dynamic value, then it'll automatically show or default to that the user that's logged in. It'll show their username. A lot of the times I will use a read-only element field when I've placed this in the dynamic value so that the user cannot change that input type or change that input. The next 2 are the iFormBuilder.math.sum and the iFormBuilder.math.average. As you can see, one of those adds the values from the records, while the other one finds the average from the records. Just to reiterate what I said earlier, you need to have more than one record to be able to find the sum and to be able to find the average. And, oops, I skipped ahead a little too fast. And then the last one was the get next sequence, which allows the users to keep track of how many records they have provided. Now, just to go into a little bit, go a little deeper with that subform aggregation and finding the sum and the average. This is how it can be done. So go back to our form builder. Below we have our built-in function, which I just mentioned to you before, which is, like I said, just iFormBuilder.username placed in a read-only. Next, I have a subform, which is I've already attached by selecting the input type subform, gone into Smart Paging, and I've selected the specific subform. Underneath that, I have my 2 read-only fields, one finding the sum and one finding the average. And in the Smart Controls, you will see the iFormBuilder.math.sum, and then I'm referencing the table name for this specific form, and that is actually I want to go back over there. That's where we ran into that error earlier. So by placing that table name, the parent table name in that first section, and then the subform to aggregate totals, this is referencing this subform element, the data column name from here, so subform to aggregate totals. And then addition 1 is referencing in the form, in that subform that I've attached, I have a field called addition 1, and this is where it's referencing. So if you look at it, it's almost, you're able to see that connection. So you're saying the parent form, the element in the parent form to the element within the subform. And you'll see it's the same exact setup as the subform aggregation for the average, except instead of iformbuilder.math.sum, it's iformbuilder.math.avg for the average. And again, we have all of this information, and we've broken it down even further with our help desk articles, but I will also be sharing with you these slides. So I'm going to bring that form up again to show and to, of course, test to make sure that our subform aggregation is now working. While I do that, Ryan, how's everything going on your end?
Things are going quite well. We have a question here about calculating percentage in a subform, and I'm just going to be sharing a few links over here to you, Betsy. The other question was, I'm sure there's a lot of content being shared. We are, in fact, recording this, and we will be sharing with you the recording as well as the slide deck and other details pertaining to the functions that Barrett's talking about. So no need to be scribbling down everything. We will get this out to you within 24 hours.
And yes, I know I do tend to talk a little bit fast, so thank you for bearing with me and asking those questions. And again, we're happy to share this information with you after. So I'm just going to jump down to the built-in functions where we left off before to make sure and test to see that my code is now working accurately for the what I've just updated to match for the sum. So I am going to go into the mathematical functions for subform aggregation. And I am going to place different numbers here. Now, before I actually go any further, I want to make sure I'll also show you what it looks like for this addition and the calculations to occur within the form. For the addition totals in the smart controls, you see num1 plus num2 plus num3. So very simply, those are the data column names. I've defaulted them to all equals 0. If you don't do this, you may find that sometimes the numbers carry over from a previous input. So that's why I usually choose to default the dynamic value for each number to 0. All right, so I'm just submitting that first record. Now I'm going to create that second record for this aggregation. All right, so I had those two records. I'm going to go back, and as you can see for my addition field, I now have a number. So that tells me that previously when it wasn't working correctly, it was because I had a different data column or a different table name, and I needed to make sure I was referencing the correct table name. So now if I go back to my aggregation average, I also want to make sure I've changed that table name to match. And that table name, again, is found in the Edit Form Properties page, which you can locate from the Form Builder by selecting Edit. And this is the table name, which is right under the form label. As a reminder, the form label is what you'll see on your device, and the table name is what you'll see in the data and the metadata, as well as what you reference for the JavaScript and the form functionality. The other thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned to you today was about the page level JavaScript. So earlier I noted or I stated that with the dynamic values and the conditional values and the smart controls within your form, you can add a plethora of of controls in there, but because of, depending on what functionality you want to occur, it may be a very long piece of code. So our suggestion is to place it in the page level JavaScript and then reference it using like the variables. And again, if you're familiar with JavaScript, you'll completely understand what I'm saying. But if you're not, we have this in our within our help desk articles, and we're here to help you with this as well. But you'll reference it, and then within an element in your form, and then that functionality will occur based off of the page level JavaScript that you have for that parent form. If you want something to occur in that subform as well, make sure you place it in the page level JavaScript for the parent form rather than the subform element. Just because you can think about it as a way that you're opening a door. To get to that subform, you first have to go through that parent form. All right, I'm getting to the bottom of my slide deck here, so I just have one more slide that I want to cover with you. The first, with this, there's 4 things on this slide that we didn't touch upon today, but we do have a lot of information about it within our help desk, and as well as, of course, just asking us. The first one here is how to display a parent form element in a subform, or vice versa. That can go both ways. So maybe you have a user placing in their name and a specific piece of information, and you want both of those inputs to be then shown on the subform. You're able to do that through the JavaScript and referencing the table name as well as the form elements. Very similar to what we did with the iForm Builder aggregation. The second thing here, and the second way to add more to your form is by using a smart table search. If you're unfamiliar what this is, it's located in Form Builder, and it's right under our smart controls. So we have the smart table search. And what that does is it calls to another form, and in that other form will essentially be a database that will store information about a user or about a location, and based off of what a user places in a specific form, a unique identifier, it'll call to that database and display information based off of that unique identifier. So that's another amazing way to cut down on some of that human error. The third way to add more to your form is to integrate with hardware. We have many different devices that you can currently use to reference and to scan items or scan barcodes, to print out information, or to take a temperature. You can use those within iForm Builder because we do have those elements, some of those elements within our Form Builder. And the fourth here is to assign a post. Now this doesn't really have much to do with your Form Builder. It's actually under the form assignment. But what you're able to do is push your data somewhere else or push your information somewhere else to make your forms more dynamic. All right, the next session we have is going to be in a month, and it's called Data, Understanding and Integrating iForm Builder Data with Third-Party Integration Tools. We also reference some other support tools and a way for you to access our recorded training sessions. So once this training is complete, in the next 24 hours, we will send you an email as well as put the link up on this help desk article, and you'll be able to access it from there. All right, Ryan, that's actually it for me. I've been talking pretty fast today, so if there are any questions, this is a great time, and I'd be happy to answer some, as well as if you have any additional information you want to include.
Sure. So a couple of the questions that are coming in are quite specific to workflows. For example, calculating percentages on a multi-linking subform, how to get the average percentage out to the parent form. So I'm working with a few of you back and forth here. I'll be sending some links out to your personal emails. We also have a few questions pertaining to and Barrett, you might want to jump in here. If you have a subform and you take a series of calculations, how do I make sure that the next subform record that I go into is reset to 0 rather than containing the same value as before. And the short answer there is to make sure that the values are set to 0 in the dynamic value, just like Barrett's showing on the screen right now. So long as everything is set to 0 and defined as a number or a string, you're able to then, it will reset on that subform as it keeps coming up. So I hope that was helpful. Outside of that, I encourage all of you to take a look at the link in the chat. That is for the Eventbrite page for the Power Summit or Power User Summit. There's going to be a lot of really neat tutorials, workflows. We're also going to be able to interact with each other at a different level. Sit down at the computers, talk through some very specific workflows with your, with a member of our team, or also collaborate with some other groups. In the spirit of collaboration, we're really focused on what that looks like moving forward. So, or in other words, there's going to be others that may be in your industry. At the same time, there's a lot of different projects that are happening around the world. So lots to learn from, but also especially for the basics and more of the complex workflow within the platform. There's a lot more that we're able to do. So you'll be able to meet with Barrett. We're actually considering some of the sessions, certain breakout sessions for beginner or intermediate form building, things that are happening within the platform, as well as the actual integration that's occurring outside of it. So with that, Barrett, great job. It seems like a lot of the questions here are very specific, and I will be following up with each one of you separately. So I thank you all for participating, and I'll be sending out the recorded session via email within 24 hours. So thank you so much, and look forward to work with everyone. With that, I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.